Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chatting with You. I'm Giselle Urbina,
I'm Gadiel Rosario.
and today we're going to be talking about communication in the office. Communication comes in very different ways. Some is non-verbal, some is verbal. There's just many kinds. And at the workplace, communication is key to accomplish any task. So today we're going to discuss a few things, examples, and ideas on how we communicate here at work. And it should be fun. It should be interesting.
Yes, for me, communication is one of the most interesting and important topics regarding how you handle your office, especially if you are an office that works a lot in a team setting. A lot of teamwork, because everybody is doing kind of their own thing, but it's to end up with a final product that it'll come together at the end. And I'm sure everybody agrees that communication is important. That is not an issue. Everybody recognizes that to be successful in any industry, business, office, you have to have good communication between the employees, the administration, in our case, attorneys, even clients. That shows how efficient you are. But even then, when you know that is super important, there's still some miscommunication that happens, and then problems arise. So that's the tricky thing. You may be conscious that you need it, but it still happens. So that is why we are bringing this podcast today to help out anybody who has experienced this, which is, I guess, it's 100% of everybody, because communication is something that you work towards. It will never get perfect, but you can get close, right?
Exactly. I agree 100%. And if you think about it, we need communication in every single aspect in our lives. We communicate with our spouses, our kids, our family members, our friends. When you go to a store, like in every aspect, we're always communicating with someone in some sort of way. At work, it's very important because you spend here most of your time, and of course, the product of your work depends a lot of how you communicate, how you do things, how you organize it. So I think that's very important too.
Yes,
to have.
And I'm glad you brought up the different type of communications in our lives, because this is an office communication, but it serves to compare the office communication versus how you communicate with the people in your family. When you go to a store, so you don't talk the same way, or you don't provide the same information, or basically you address the context. So in an office, it would be more professional, more complete. When you're at your home with your spouse, it would be hopefully more loving. Explaining your day to your kids. You have to prepare, basically say what you're going to say in a way that they can understand it, which is similar to how you explain to a client what you're doing, or to a paralegal who's not an attorney or an assistant. You have to make them understand what is it that you want. So that is also part of communicating. It's not only conveying that information, is making sure that that person is understanding it also and receiving it completely.
Exactly. And one of the things that I always think about, when you go to the doctor and then the nurse asks you like all these questions, and then the doctor comes and he asks you the exact same question. Sometimes I'm like, why do I have to answer the same thing? Oh, and before that, we fill this questionnaire and there's like the same question. So basically the same information gets
confirmed
like 2 or 3 times. But it is so important that it is, because every single person in the process must understand this information, must know exactly what to do. And I think in the office it's super important, just like in the doctor's office, in any kind of other professional environment. In order to get your work done, you have to have an effective communication. And to me, it starts all with personality. We're all different. We have different personalities. We learn differently. There's some things that I might say that you might take it a different way. So I feel that as a communicator, you should know your listener. You should know the person that you're getting that message delivered to. That, to me, that's the first step. Knowing that person and understanding what's the best way to get that message across. Because even though we're working on the same, legal ramification of the law, whatever, like the immigration in this case, even though we're all in that same context, we still are at different levels, right? The attorneys usually do more of the deep work and more detail oriented, and they know a little bit more than maybe the paralegals, and then the paralegals know a little bit more than the administration. So when you talk to an admin person, sometimes you have to explain a little bit in more detail.
Exactly.
Maybe if you were to say that same message to a paralegal, then you could,
couple words will suffice.
Exactly.
So you would need to know, like, you can tell a paralegal a message the same way you would tell the assistant, who maybe is not even that that accustomed or knows a lot about that particular case. So it would be just like, so give me some context. What is all this about? Something that also you have to be careful, especially in the American society, we use a lot of acronyms.
Yes.
So sometimes people don't know what that means. Maybe a DO. So what is a DO? Well, it's a deportation order. Or, there's different type of acronyms. So at least me, what I usually do when I'm communicating, in this case, say a note in the computer, I put the acronym, but then beside it, I put in parentheses what it is, at least one time, so that, if somebody that doesn't understand it, can pick up on it because I'm putting it next to it. And that way I'm basically not making that person come to me and maybe wasting a little bit of time asking me what does this stand for. I'm not understanding the task that you're giving me, or I'm not understanding what I'm supposed to ask the client, and that way is more efficient.
Correctly, it's more efficient you putting that there and clarifying it beforehand than having that person think, okay, what does this mean? Let me try to Google it. Let me try to ask somebody. Let me try to call him and see what he meant. So you waste more time when your communication is not specific, clear, and where it needs to be documented, right? So I agree with you in that. And I feel like the more you get to know someone and the more you are able to get your communication, specific to that person, the better it's going to be. So like we're saying, like, it depends on who gets that message. Now, as a listener, if we switch the roles, I feel like all listeners should make sure that the information that they are receiving, they're understanding it.
Exactly.
So a lot of people do, like, again, I go back to the medical field. Like when somebody's going to do an operation on a leg, they ask you like 20 times, is it the right or the left? Is it the right or the left? Everybody, like, since you fill out the first sheet of paper until you're actually at the operation room, they're like, is it the left? Is it the right? And they mark it and they ask again. It's the same thing as when you're a listener and you get this message from anyone. The first thing I would do is, okay, what you meant was
exactly corroborate.
Yes. Like, make sure that you understand the information. If you if you understand it but you have questions, you should ask them right then.
Exactly.
Granted, sometimes you just start doing your task and then the questions come. That's fine, it happens. But if you have questions right then, you should clarify it back then, because I think it's just going to be more efficient than waiting later. When you at the beginning you already knew, you didn't understand.
Exactly, and that's what we're talking about. It's not just communicate. It's also understanding what the communication is all about. Because you can put out the communication, but if people are not understanding it and you don't even know that they're not understanding it, then there's gonna be a problem which is gonna explode eventually. And that's what you wanna avoid. So that bringing that up, switching it up to the listener, that's very important, and a good way to do that yourself, because ultimately the listener who is receiving that message of that communication would be liable, responsible for whatever that communication the purpose of that communication was.
Exactly.
So I totally agree with that, and you know, corroborate, make sure that that what you understand is actually what it is.
Exactly. And since we're in the topic of personalities, if you think about it, just communicating between women and men is different. Sometimes I might look at somebody here in the office who's another woman. I might just look at her and she knows exactly what I want to say.
Men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
Exactly, right? So it's incredible, but it's true. And maybe you are communicating with, you know, a male employee here, and you guys say something or do something that we completely miss or don't get it.
Well, we know what it means, because there's also nonverbal communication.
Exactly.
That's right.
So communication, like we said in the beginning, happen in many different ways, and we as the communicators, or we as the listeners, need to put in place certain practices to make sure that it's effective, because I feel communication is a two-way street. It's not only one person telling something, it's also how the other person understands it, because it can change completely. You might understand the complete opposite.
Exactly. You know, that brings me a memory from elementary school. I don't know if you've ever done this in that type of setting, but it's basically that, you know, let's say there's 20 kids on the classroom, right? So to show communication and how it can get distorted, the teacher tells the first, you know, in the rows, tells the first one on the left of the classroom a secret, right?
Yeah.
A secret. Anything like I'm gonna play basketball after school, and then they keep on telling each other that same message, and then they keep on going, and then by the end, the message becomes, I don't like basketball, I'm going to sleep. You know, and it was an eye opener. You know, being in elementary school and watching that happen before your eyes is like, oh my God, you know, how things can get distorted that way, and a totally different thing ends up being the message. Imagine that in an office setting where you are a professional providing professional services to ultimately your client, who is ultimately the one who can get harmed by all this. If there's no good communication practices in place.
Exactly. That's why it's so vital. And add to that we're all from different backgrounds. We come from different countries. We come from different, like, we're different ages. Like, there's words, even though we mostly speak Spanish, I mean, 100% of us speak Spanish in the office, we come from different countries. So maybe a word that we say is completely different to another person. And for example, to me, the word that is so crucial that I need to always keep thinking about it is ahorita. To me, ahorita means later. But to some other people, some other Spanish-speaking people, ahorita is now. That's completely the opposite. So I always need to try to, you know, remind myself, make sure you explain, or make sure you say it the right way, or the way they understand it. Like, if I speak to you, I know you're going to get it because we're from the same country.
Exactly.
But if I speak to some other people, I'm conscious about that.
Yes.
Same thing when you guys do the consults with the clients. You are always trying to make sure that certain words are not said, because it can be offensive.
It can be offensive. And the same way that you mentioned it, you have to be aware of it, conscious all the time, because sometimes a word just slips out. It may not be an offensive word, but I see on their faces like, what did you just say? And then I realize it, and I'm like, wait a second, you know, and you know, I don't want it to come the wrong way. Like, you know, I didn't understand him. That's the least thing that I want a potential client to feel during my consult. You know, so I make a point to make sure, you know my audience, and speak with the words that at least are universal. Exactly. You know, so I know that they will understand it. So in that way, I've changed the way that I speak in consults from the way that I speak every day to my colleagues. The people in the office. It's not the same way.
Yeah. And sometimes you get so used to it speaking that way that you come home and you still
Exactly.
Like I know it happens to Michael, like when he does a bunch of consults, sometimes he comes home and he's speaking, I'm like, well, okay, what are you talking about? But now we're used to it, at the beginning it was kind of weird, but it's true, you have to adapt to your audience. At the end of the day, you need the client to understand. Yes, you need to understand the client, but at the end, it's so important that they understand
exactly
the process, what they need, where they're really, the situation they're into, what can we do for them, right? So that's as far as we can talk about personalities and communication. Let's talk about a little bit on documentation. So, of course, we cannot be all physically telling each other what to do. Many of the communication in the office is documented, right? So that way I receive a message, I write a note, somebody else can read it, and then they can do their part that they, their task based on the note I put. So tell me a few things that good documentation should have.
Well, good documentation should have, it should be specific. I myself write a lot. I don't care. If it's something simple, it's simple. But if it's different things that are going on, I write them. I even write, if the judge was present or if the judge wasn't present, if the client was present, if the client wasn't present, because eventually something can come up and be like, wait, he wasn't there, so he couldn't have given me that document, for example. So so good documentation helps with, going back to explaining things to a client. If there was a misunderstanding, you can be like, oh, so this is what I understood at that time. This is what we talked about. We always put the dates. Always put the date. Always put the date, because you don't know, if we were supposed to give something to a client, for example, and there's no date, it's like, okay, so since when were we supposed to give this to the client? It's either, oh, it was yesterday, we're fine, or oh, it was a month ago. So we should go in, and that communication should start with maybe an apology. So those are the things that you...
And that reminds me of something. Like, even when you do the intake, dates are so important, because I received an intake the other day. And basically, just for those of you that don't know, intake is like the first sheet of paper you fill out with your potential client. You get all the information like name, address, and different questions specific to immigration or criminal cases, depending on what that case might be. And in one of those, I was reviewing it, and it said the client entered the United States 3 weeks ago, but the actual intake didn't have a date on when it was filled out. I knew it wasn't that same day, because that intake, I didn't get it that same day. I got it a few days after it was filled out, for sure. So how can I know when that person actually entered the United States if you don't put specifics?
Exactly.
It's impossible. So it sounds like maybe, oh, that's not that important. It is so important to know exactly when that person came in, or at least an approximation, because there's deadlines around that.
Exactly.
For asylums, for example. But it's just, when you said that about the dates, it reminded me of that and how important it is for good documentation to have dates.
Exactly. And that's what we're talking about, is the context. Because at the time that person is filling it out, 3 weeks ago. Yeah, 3 weeks ago from today, because I'm writing it right now. Fast forward 5 days later. Oh, when was this actually 3 weeks ago? So what was that date? Oh, I don't remember. Oh, I'm not sure. Wait, was it Cinco de Mayo? Because I had tacos that day. Things like that,
Yeah.
So a date will eliminate all of that ambiguity, So for me, dates are super important also, and we do this also at the office, is to have the initials, at least the initials of the person writing the note. Because then it's like, okay, so who wrote this? And if the person who wrote it doesn't even remember having written it, or, just nothing triggers, like it was me, then, so a mystery. Nobody knows who wrote
If
this.
you have a question about it, you don't have a person you can go ask.
Exactly.
Because you don't know who it was. So initials, clear, date are very good, important things about writing a note. And
then the details, and always thinking, who is the person who is going to be the receiver of this communication? Who am I intending it for? And trying to acknowledge what they need really to understand about this so that they can execute that, so that they can do what they have to do in a complete manner.
Exactly. That's very true. So talking about communication, I mean documentation, I think that we covered at least the ones that we use here the most, which are those, making sure it's clear. And to summarize it, of course, we can go and talk about this for a long time, but we just wanted to give out some pointers on a couple of ideas of things that we do here. Just to summarize what we said, to have effective communication in an office, it should be clear as possible. It should be constant. We should be in constant communication with whoever, clients and other colleagues, the court. Like, we need to have that, making sure it's constant and complete. We gotta make sure that the message has all the aspects needed for that listener to understand. If on the opposite side, if it's not complete, if it's vague, if you don't have constant communication, if it's interrupted for whatever reason, then it can cause problems, and that is not going to be effective. And then that's when things get, can get bad.
Exactly. Especially if it's something urgent. A good practice also is to have, a box or something in the system, basically wherever you put your notes and document the cases and everything that's happening, the updates. It's good to have an urgent, just in case something happens that is important for whoever is gonna speak to that person to be aware of that. Because if you're gonna miss any information, it better not be an urgent one. Because sometimes you may miss something and it may not cause big issues, but Murphy's law says that whenever something is missing, that is gonna be the problem. So the only way that you can avoid that is for that communication to be constant all the time. If it gets interrupted, you have to be aware. If you get a message in the car or something like that you can readily go into your computer and write it down, you have to make a habit of that. And remember of that, or do a note later on, or call somebody and let them know, hey, write this down. He told me this and we didn't know about that. So this is very important. This changes everything.
Exactly. I agree 100%. Well, I think we covered a lot. We can, like I said, we can definitely talk about this for a long time. But I'm very happy that we were able to do this together.
Yes,
Thank you
it's our
for
first
joining
time
me.
together.
Yes, and chatting with you. And we hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, you can always write us. And thank you and have a great day.
Have a great day.